You can go. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and welcome you all to the Cambridge City Council Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Antoinette Nestor, and I'm the chair of this committee meeting. For those that are online, thank you very much for waiting for those few minutes. And can those please, in the room, please note that everything on your desk can be seen, and at some point, as the cameras follow within the room on the microphone, so just be aware of that. And if you're following the Teams meeting here in the room on your laptop, please make sure that your audio and microphone and camera are switched off. And we're not expecting any fire alarm, so if the fire alarm sounds, please follow the officers who will leave the room and exit the building via the Peace Hill staircase and exit. Do not use the lift. Now, I will now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname, so the public can see who they are. And if there are any other apologies, please let me know. Are there any apologies? Have anybody sent in apologies? No? Okay, excellent. So, Councillor Bagent?
This is me.
Thank you. Councillor Beck?
Present.
Excellent. Councillor Claw?
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dikovic?
Present, thank you.
Councillor Griffin?
Present, thank you.
Councillor Porter?
Present, thank you, Chair.
And Councillor Swift?
Present, Chair.
Excellent. Now, the Executive Councillor for Planning, Building Control and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornborough, is also present. Welcome you.
Yes, I'm present, thank you.
And we're also joined by the Deputy Director of the GCSP and 3C Building Control, Heather Jones. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, present.
I will also welcome presenting and supporting officers for each item that they're going to report on. Now we have the committee manager, Claire Tuncliffe, on my side, and meeting producer, Boris Herzog, who will be present during the meeting. Thank you both. Now, for those who are not aware of the meeting procedure, the committee will receive a presentation from the relevant report author. Member will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendation. As chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. And following the vote of the committee, the executive councillor will be asked if they agree the decision. So, thank you very much. So, there are no apologies because everybody's here, which is great. Now we'll move on to the agenda number 2. Please, could committee members declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item the declaration relates to. Okay, yes, Councillor Veg.
Chair, I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest at the moment? Okay, but just remember that you can declare any interest at any time during the meeting. Now, the agenda for minutes from the 19th of March to 2024 and the 23rd of May meetings at pages 5 to 26 have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise hands. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Bagent, yes.
Thank you, Chair. At that meeting, which was a long time ago, my notes say that the Cambridge Delivery Group update involving Peter Freeman and the Cambridge 2040 project would be an agenda item at every meeting in the future. That doesn't appear to be in the minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Bagent. Let me just here consult with. That would be amended. Thank you very much, Councillor Bagent. Okay.
Just to confirm, for the Cambridge Grove Company, there were further announcements, I think, made last week. However, Councillor Mike Davey is the lead member of this, so the proper process would be that it goes to S&R committee for updates and not planning and transport. Thank you.
Councillor Begin?
Clearly, Chair, I'm not comfortable with that. Stephen Kelly, the head of planning, reported back to us on the 19th of the 3rd some of the details of this growth committee. And we questioned him about it, and he said that he would make reports at further meetings. Now, I recognise that Mike Davey is the lead and the leader of the council, but this is a planning and strategy scrutiny committee, and we have the right, I believe, to scrutinise what Stephen Kelly has said to the growth committee, or whatever it's going to be called. I call it the Cambridge Delivery Group. If the leader of the council wanted to be here to talk about that, then he could have come, but he didn't. And it's in the minutes. We've just agreed that it's in the minutes. And so I would like to know why people are trying to change ideas about how things are going to be done. Sorry, Heather.
Thank you, Councillor Bajan. I think the best thing I can do is take that back, and I'll obviously Stephen's not here tonight, so I'll take that back and discuss it with Stephen and with I'm sure he will take that up with Councillor Mike Davey and Councillor Katie Thornborough. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Bajan?
I accept what's being said, and I recognise that this puts people in a very difficult position. But I do feel that there's been an avoidance of public scrutiny on what's going on this growth committee. And I think that this Planning and Transport Committee has the right to call for a report. Do you agree with that?
Thank you. Any other changes on the agenda other than this particular point? So I think that I remember when Stephen Kelly actually did say that he would bring the report. Claire is going to amend the agenda, the minutes from last meeting to reflect what it has said, what has been said, and I believe we should sort of discuss with the leader of the council and Stephen how we're going to proceed forward, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves on a deadlock. Yes, Katie?
So we've got a new government now, and I think the processes are being reviewed, and the new government have made several statements, and they're in the public domain. Mike Davey is the councillor, and he's our leader, and he's the councillor who is dealing with Peter Freeman. So it is right that if there is updates, that Mike, the leader, makes those updates, and Stephen Kelly, I think it would be appropriate for Stephen Kelly to attend the S&R Strategy and Resources meeting if at the moment it's a strategy item. When it comes down to planning policy level, then there may be very clear issues that we need to deal with here. And I would hope that if there are planning policy issues or transport issues, that they would certainly be scrutinised here. But it's to do with where this has got to, and I feel that it's not about planning policy at the moment. It's a much higher level strategy, and the leader of the council is dealing with it.
Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. Councillor Bajan?
Chair, I don't wish to disagree with my colleague, but I'm a member of the Strategy, Planning and Transport Committee. As a member of that planning committee, we are, I am sure, entitled to ask for Stephen Kelly to make us a report. And if the leader wants to come to this committee, then he should. It's not a question for the leader or the transport executive to deal with. It's a question for this committee, and I'm asking that should happen. Do you agree with me?
Thank you, Councillor Bajan. So we'll put it for the next scrutiny meeting, excuse me, on the agenda. We'll put the leader of the City Council and Stephen Kelly, if appropriate, for both of them to be here, and to add it to an item for the next meeting. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Now, so with that amendment for the previous agenda from the 19th of March and 23rd of May, with the amendment, does everybody agree to it? Yes? Okay. Yes, thank you. Now we move on to agenda item 4, which are public questions. Now there has been one public question received in advance of the meeting. The text of the question will no longer be read out as it has been published in advance of the meeting. The Executive Councillor or officer has 2 minutes to provide a response. Public speakers then have an opportunity to ask a follow-up question for up to 2 minutes, and the Executive Councillor or officer may respond as appropriate for up to 2 minutes. The committee manager will advise when the time periods are up. So now, welcome to the public speaker. And the question is actually on the screen. Now, Mr. Carpen, thank you very much. And would the Executive Councillor please respond to Mr. Carpen?
Yes, Anthony Carpen, thank you very much for asking your question earlier and coming to this committee. We do appreciate public questions raised here. So, subject to the consideration at this committee, we will be consulting on all of the agreed SPDs that are on the agenda for a period of 8 weeks to allow everybody with an interest to give us their feedback. You've raised a very interesting issue, and we can consider how this relates to the SPD. The consultation will include consulting the combined authority, and other education stakeholders will be able to comment as well. The responsibility of adult education has become a devolved matter now within the remit of the combined authority. Whilst it doesn't deliver direct services, the combined authority supports adult education providers through central government funding provided through the devolution deal. Supporting skills, development and training is something we are interested in, as shown in the City Council's Community Wealth Building Strategy. The draft SPD includes chapters looking into how we can support this through planning obligations, and we're looking to do even more through the emerging Greater Cambridge Local Plan.
Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. Now, Mr. Carpen, do you have a supplementary question? And if so, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. I'd just like to raise the House of Commons Education Committee report HC 278, 19th of December 2020, a plan for an adult skills and lifelong learning revolution. So that's from the previous Parliament. And it recommends a new lifelong learning centre in every town. I would like to formally submit that paper to the consultation. The other thing that you briefly mentioned, I think earlier, Councillor Thornborough, is there was a meeting earlier with the combined authority where I had another question tabled about the transport access to new learning centres, and it feels like so much has happened actually in the past week, in particular since I tabled the this public question, and the idea that we had we've got 4 meetings this week covering similar issues makes it actually very difficult for anyone, let alone myself, to scrutinise what is going on. The Housing Minister has obviously made comments about how much Cambridge is due to develop as far as he is concerned, and I think this makes it all the more pressing that we come up with a suitable forum, mindful of the discussion you've just had, on things like how we are governed. This paper from the House of Commons Library, 12th of June 2024, is on unitary local government. And then all things light rail, which Councillor Smith of this council said that the combined authority would be looking at. I urge the council to consider all of those things when you go out to public consultation with the SPDs. Thank you.
Yes, we'll thank you for those and highlighting those, and we'll take them away, and I'll pass them to Jonathan there, Jonathan Dixon, who's leading on these policy items. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carpen. Now, we turn to agenda item 5, which are on pages 27 and 36, which is the Cambridge City Council response to the CPCA bus reform consultation. Now, for this item, we are joined by Andrew Lim, Assistant Chief Executive, and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority Executive Director of Place and Connectivity, Judith Barker. Oh, yes. Yes. So, Councillor Anne Smith is also joining us virtually for this item. So, we welcome to you all. Andrew, please start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. As everyone knows, I think the Combined Authority is undertaking a consultation on whether to take forward bus franchising or an enhanced partnership. I've drafted a suggested Cambridge City Council response to that consultation, and that's before the committee this evening, and I'm delighted that the Executive Director for Connectivity in Place has joined the meeting to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very brief. So now we move on to the members' questions. So could I please ask to raise your hands? So I have Councillor Beck and Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased that this could be added to our agenda because this is a fundamental change that's being mooted and our City Council is a statutory consultee, I believe, for the current consultation that is going on. So it is appropriate that we get a chance to scrutinise. I have four questions, and they aren't terribly related, so I would like to ask them separately.
Certainly. Yes, let's go by one since I think no other questions at the moment. So.
But the first of those, and perhaps I just preface this by saying so that people aren't misled by the tenor of my raising these questions. I am broadly in favour of the proposal for bus franchising. It seems to make a lot of sense to me, but of course we get to the stage where there is now more detail to understand. The first of my questions is about income and funding. It's stated in the consultation document that whether franchising would be the most beneficial thing for us to do depends on the level of income that's available to support it. And it says, on the other hand, that if income is available at only a very low level, there would be no point in it, and instead an enhanced partnership would be the best measure. So it predicates the proposal for franchising in the consultation on what it calls a mid-level of income. It considers that franchising is the right option, and it says, and I think I quote correctly, that because it is affordable and sustainable, yet the income to support it is only an assumption. And I'm interested to know, how does the Combined Authority know that the income at a medium level is available and that it is sustainable and affordable? What is the income that is being assumed, and how much of it is coming from which sources? Could the officer explain how much is existing income, which is already flowing, so presumably one could be relatively certain that's there, how much is firmly guaranteed, and how much should residents and businesses expect to be charged extra under the mayoral precept and the transport levy, which in one of the graphs in the consultation paper are both assumed that there would be extra mayoral precept and extra transport levy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beck. Now, would Andrew or Judith like to answer those questions?
Andrew, would you like me to take that question?
Yes,
He's
please.
saying yes.
Okay. Can I ask the committee, if I shared a slide with some of this information on, would the committee be able to see that slide, or would that not be helpful?
We should be able to.
Okay. Give me one moment whilst I just see if I can share some information. I have it already open on my screen, so this should work. And I will just go into the slideshow format now, if it will let me.
We
Right.
can see the slide. Yes, excellent.
Okay, what I'm going to do, because the question particularly relates to some later slides, so I am going to jump through some of those slides to particularly answer the question that was posed, which was clearly about affordability and the use of, well, where the money comes from. And indeed also the issue about affordability and sustainability. And I have two slides which cover that. These slides have been in the public domain through the consultation meetings, and we do have a further online consultation meeting next week when we will be talking through these slides again. So if there are any any members that wish to join those sessions, Democratic Services at City Council do have those details. But specifically looking at this slide, and I'm sure it's difficult to see from a distance, but perhaps if I speak to the colours and the numbers, that will give a sense of the detail. So the scale along the x-axis, or the horizontal axis at the bottom, is over time from 2023 to 2054, as the business case is done over a 30-year period. Then the y-axis is from naught at the bottom to, now let me just get this right. Let me just double check before I make an error. Yes, is 180 million over the period. So what you see, and I'll just talk to the colours because I think that's the most important piece. So the colour, the deep orange at the bottom, this big I don't know quite what shape it is, but that big orange shape at the bottom is the fare revenue. So what you see here is from, if we imagine a scenario whereby under franchising, the CPCA would start to receive the fare income. Obviously, the fare income is overwhelmingly received by the bus operating companies at the moment, but if we went to a franchise model whereby CPCA was contracting all of those services, instead CPCA would receive the fare income. So you see, obviously, going from a very minimal amount there in 2026 to 2027, that would jump if we assume franchising were to be implemented from 2027, depending on the mayoral decision that is made and the outcome of this consultation. So you can see the fare revenue is a large part of the affordability. Then you see the blue line, thick sort of royal blue line, that is government grant, which already we're assuming that to continue at current levels, but not increase. Then you see the purple band, which is the transport levy. So Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council are the highways authorities, and they pay a transport levy to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority to perform the role of the Strategic Transport Authority. So that purple wedge would continue, as you can see. And then you can also see the mayoral precept, and I will come on to a slide which gives more detail, but you can see that that does increase, and I'll give some further details about that. This business case presumed the £12 precept of 23-24 rather than the £36 precept of 24-25, because the business case was written predominantly in the 23-24 year, and we had to make assumptions based on that. You will also see this wiggly thin line here, just below the level of the green, that indicates the level of funding that would be required for a medium level EP. or enhanced partnership. So what you're seeing here is how the funding would be made up for a medium level investment scenario as is presented, and the slightly lower wiggly line indicates the amount of money needed for EP, which is only fractionally less than the amount of money that would be required for franchising as forecast in the business case that's in the public domain. And if I may, Chair, move to the next slide, which indicates the particular question that was posed regarding the assumptions on the mayoral precept. This slide indicates that. So the orange line, and again, I appreciate you won't be able to see the details, so I'll try and talk you through it. The orange line is the enhanced partnership, and the dark blue line is the franchise model. So what you see here so again, the bottom of the graph, the x-axis takes us from 23 to 2054, and the y-axis takes us from a precept of, so the y-axis is from £30 to the top line being £75. So what you see there by 2054 is under both scenarios, the precept is being forecast at about between £70 and £75 by 2054. Under both scenarios, slightly lower an enhanced partnership and slightly more on franchising, but both below £75. Now, obviously, the question also indicated that there is some income we know, there is other income that is clearly less certain, and obviously I would want to stress that the decisions of any level of mayoral precept are made annually as part of the budget setting process, and they have to be made in consideration of the spending requirements and the funding available at the time. So we cannot forecast in 2024 what decisions would be made by members of CPCA and other bodies that may be present by 2054, but this is a forecast based on those assumptions. And finally, if I can get the slides to move on, yes, I've done that. I'm not going to go through this now, but what I just wanted to highlight is that as part of the process of setting the business case, we have had to look at a range of different options for funding. We were only allowed to rely on the business case on certain of them. So you can see here there are discounted options that we have not pursued because we do not have those powers in place to do that. We have looked at options that are worthy of further consideration. And then we have options with the greatest potential for consideration that we have included. And you've seen there the mayoral precept, the transport levy, and indeed borrowing to facilitate some of the upfront capital costs. And so we've had to make those assumptions and then ensure that the income balance with the expenditure to go through an audit process to be able to take this to the board of CPCA in July 2024 and then go out to public consultation. So I will stop sharing, and I hope that has responded to the question that was posed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Judith. Now, Councillor Bick, I believe you had a few more questions, or most of your questions were answered.
Sorry, no, I've got some more.
Okay.
Sorry, but I believe, I'm hoping that these are illuminating questions for everyone, because it's the central part of the thing. But thank you very much for the full answer to that question. The next one is that I'm noting that the case is being implicitly made in the consultation document that the current absence of public control and funding is an important factor in the current decline of bus services. And I've no doubt it's true, but I think it's only partly true. And I may be saying that particularly from the perspective of the city of Cambridge. But the surveys that have been repeatedly carried out in this area, the number one issue with buses as a transport option have been their reliability. And relative to services within the city and services into the city from other areas, this has been correlated directly to just the amount of traffic on the roads and congestion. So isn't there a danger that franchising won't really change that much, and that more buses in longer queues may risk being a bit of a drain on the public purse for little service gain? And wouldn't it be advisable to have a strategy to reduce congestion first, or at least at the same time, and introduce franchising in conditions where it's actually going to stand the best chance of really transforming bus usage, which I totally believe in as the main goal of this whole proposal?
Thank you, Councillor Beck. Now, would Andrew or Judith like to answer? I know Councillor Smith is also online. Should you want to do any further comments? So, Judith, would you like to reply?
I'm happy to commence a reply, and I'm sure other members on the call might well wish to add to what I have to say. So if franchising were to go ahead, it would take, well, certainly in Manchester, it took 3 years from the mayoral decision to be implemented. So they made the decision in 2021, early 2021, and it was 2.5 years later when the first phase of franchising commenced, and the final phase of franchising isn't actually due to go ahead until January 2025. So making this decision, it does bring about a significant change, and that does require a considerable amount of implementation. So in that period, we will also be working, as was discussed at our Transport and Infrastructure Committee this morning, the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy, which clearly needs to sit alongside the local plan development, because clearly they will go hand in glove. And clearly both of those things need to look to address congestion. So it certainly is the case that in the comparison of an enhanced partnership with franchising, we look at the fact that franchising does offer greater control. It offers the possibility of cross-subsidy from routes that have greater profit-making ability into those that don't. But we do also need to look at how the system works as a whole, the connectivity. Clearly, if there's more people on the buses, there should be, we might expect that if there's a better functioning bus service, it is likely that fewer people will choose to use their cars. But clearly, we need to look at the system as a whole. And I believe that the work that we're commencing, very early stages at the moment, on the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy with with the City Council and others as part of that process, will allow us to look at those issues as a whole, as well as through the lens of bus franchising. But obviously happy for Andrew and other colleagues on the call to respond to that question.
Andrew, would you like to add anything else? Okay, and there's one question from Councillor Bajent and Councillor Pikovic, and okay, so Councillor.
Chair, whilst we have people here, the Greater Cambridge Transport Committee, I understand, met today, and one of the proposals there was that they would aim to address congestion in Cambridge and the need for sustainable alternatives to enable people to access jobs and services. Would somebody be able to comment about the debate that took place around that and the decisions that were made?
Councillor Smith?
Yeah, so it wasn't the Greater Cambridge Committee today, it was the Combined Authority Transport and Infrastructure Committee. And yes, there were papers coming up that discussed the process towards the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy and the ongoing commitment that we all have towards sustainable travel. So it didn't go into much more detail than that, Councillor Bajan. It was very much the kind of start of that process and that discussion. But we all remain, I think, don't we, committed to sustainable transport, active travel, and ensuring that we can reduce congestion.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Dikovic? Oh,
Sorry, I got the title wrong, yes. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
thank you, Councillor Bajent. Councillor Dikovic?
Sorry, forgive me. So I think our response as a city council is really positive to be in agreement with this, because obviously we're moving away from a profiteering model to a model that can really benefit our city and its people. And really, you can see that also from the Equalities Impact Assessment, which notes a positive impact for people with so many different characteristics: age, disability, gender reassignment, sex, pregnancy, race, all of these things that probably wouldn't be a priority if we stuck to a profiteering model, because those wouldn't be a priority, obviously, in those models. So that's really good, and I think it definitely reflects the last sentence in the draft response from the City Council, which is, and I think it's actually quite a powerful statement, which is, we look forward to better bus services for the people of Cambridge and will be keen to support this in whatever way is possible within our powers and resources. And I think that is really important to note, because we're not looking at, with the enhanced partnership, we don't have control. It's a centre ground where we will be able to take control of some of the routes and some of the contracts, but we won't have full control. Franchising allows that, and so it will guarantee sustainable routes for everybody, and it will improve the bus services in the city. So I think it's really good and really positive, and I'm really glad that that Cambridge City Council is giving this response. I do have a question though. My question is, obviously, it says that the council is broadly supportive of the proposals given the conclusions of the assessment. Now, it would be nice to hear what your main reservations are. Obviously, we understand the risks that have been mentioned, but it would be good to hear from you what your main reservations are.
Thank you, Councillor Dikovic. Andrew, would you like to reply?
You can take the boy out of the civil service, but you can't take the civil service out of the boy, maybe. That drafting probably just reflects my kind of slightly cautious nature and the fact that it's an incredibly complex set of proposals. So obviously, colleagues from the Combined Authority could give a more detailed kind of explanation of all the different cases, as Judith did in response to Councillor Bick's question. But I drafted that because I thought the council wanted to kind of send a broadly supportive measure without kind of holding itself perhaps completely and entirely to account for every kind of element of detail in it, because there is a degree of risk, there is a degree of kind of uncertainty, but I think my understanding was the council wanted to send a positive message. Ultimately, it is the mayor's decision, as I understand it, whether or not to go ahead with this, but I thought Cambridge City Council wanted to kind of send a message of support. So forgive me if it's too mealy-mouthed, but it was trying to caveat the fact that this is a very complex, not without risk kind of proposal, I suppose. I hope that's fair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, Councillor Bick, I believe you have one or two more questions.
I'll run both of them together to speed it up a bit. The type of franchising arrangement that is proposed, the consultation document suggests that franchising, the type would be the franchising that would be introduced in this area would not be like franchising in London or I think Greater Manchester, because it would share the risk with the operators. And I'd like to understand a bit more what that actually means. Is that sort of sharing of risk version of franchising a legally defined variant of franchising that you would simply introduce the operators to as the rules of the game, or is it more of a relationship-based aspiration that would be negotiated? How sure can you be that it would be forthcoming from the other side, given that franchising itself changes the frame of the game for the operators anyway? And isn't there, I wonder, a risk of this sort of sharing of risk resulting in an overly complicated arrangement, which will make accountability and transparency rather hard to achieve? And I'll ask the other one as well, which is about the question of capacity. The document does recognise that the combined authority will need some capacity that it doesn't have now in order to operate franchising. The document actually makes a point that one of the problems of the current private sector arrangement is that the operators can be very risk averse, something which is very often accused of local government for being. This implies then that the combined authority would be more effective at managing risk and in some cases be bolder than the current arrangement. So the combined authority is today, I think, a relatively small organisation. I don't think it has much experience in commercial decision-making and managing supply and demand in a marketplace, quite like we're talking about here. So I see that the solution is discussed frequently in the document, simply to hire more new people, which I can see would be necessary. But what about resilience? Because, you know, Transport for London, Greater Manchester have, you know, it's going to be a much bigger project in a wider based project in those sort of organisations. So what about resilience in this much smaller area? What about culture? Because this is outside the comfort zone of a lot of local government. And what about data and data management, which is a necessary component of this, I think? And do you have plans for those things too?
Thank you very much, Councillor Beck. Now, Judith, would you like to answer these questions in relation to risk and capacity? Basically, you can combine your answer.
Yes, I will do my best. Thank you. So you are right in that we are taking a slightly different approach to Manchester and London, but there's some detail there that I just need to clarify in terms of how it is different. So the model in London is governed in a different way by a different set of legislation, and we're not going to be, because it is different legislation, we're not following that legislation. However, we are following the 2017 Bus Services Act that Manchester have followed, but we have a slightly different business plan to them. And the difference in the business plan is key to the different models. So in Manchester, effectively, Manchester have not only taken control of the bus routes, but they have also purchased the buses as well. So they have invested in a considerably large capital investment to get to that model, and then they are contracting operators such as Arriva and others to deliver particular sections of their service. So they divided the city into three: northwest, northeast and south. They started in the northwest, which went live in September 23. March 24, the northeast, Rochdale and that quadrant went live, and then on the 5th of January the south part of Manchester is going live. But they are purchasing the buses and the infrastructure. Now, the model that we are looking at is not the same as that. We have a bus depot strategy and we have identified the funding in the business case to run the depots, but the model that we are looking at is that we are contracting the buses and the operations together. So we would not be the owners of the vehicles themselves. What we would be doing is specifying the within the contracts, which we would be looking at likely 7-year contracts for those vehicles, and we would through that way be able to establish the network, the ticketing, the systems, etc., that would allow those buses to operate. So it's not particularly that that the risk sits differently, although clearly the risk is different in that risk in that financial sense. But the model is the main difference of the model is through the capital investment up front. So hopefully that helps a little bit of that, but certainly in terms of the performance management of those contracts, we would absolutely be looking to learn from TfL, from Transport for Greater Manchester, and other locations where they're more advanced in this process than us. But Manchester is the only place that's gone live, so that is the key place to start using the legislation that we're looking at. And you're absolutely right that if the decision, so the consultation runs until the 20th of November, we will then have a process of reporting on that consultation, and that will go through due process towards the board, and then a mayoral decision early next year. When we've gone through that process, clearly we will then need, and we are already kind of considering these issues, to look at what will be required for implementation. And effectively, we've identified a number of work streams. We will clearly need to be looking at IT, at customer service, at governance, at staffing, at the technology that we're going to require. There is a number of strands, and as you quite rightly identify, it needs to be resilient, it needs to have the right culture, it needs to have the appropriate risk management. We particularly are focused on the commercial and procurement strategy because what we want to do, for instance, is to ensure that our small and medium-sized operators are able to access the market. So there's so many strands to look at, but obviously we can't predetermine the outcome of this consultation, and so that is why, one of the reasons why clearly it takes a considerable time after a decision to implement, because all of that work needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Judith, for your very thorough answer, and thank you, Councillor Bake, for bringing all those questions. I think issues of transport for Cambridge is, many people actually want to know what is happening, so thank you very much. Now, if there are no more questions, then we will go to vote. One more question? Sorry, have I missed somebody? Online. Apologies, Councillor Smith. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things really briefly. One is, you'll know I've been quite quiet in this discussion. This is because I don't want to accidentally say anything that may be seen to be predetermining or to be seeking to influence my City Council colleagues in this regard, because obviously as lead person for transport, although it is the Mayor's decision, I want to be really transparent and careful that I'm not causing a predetermination issue. The other thing I just wanted to say was thank you so much for kind of bringing this discussion to the committee. I think it's very helpful. It's been really useful to listen to the discussions, and I'm very grateful that Judith was able to spend the time to give us such a detailed set of answers as well.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So no more questions from the floor or more points online. So as I said, we will now go to the vote, which the recommendation is on page 27 of the agenda pack. So all those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. So that is unanimous. So does the Executive Councillor agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do, and I'd like to thank Andrew Lynn for preparing the report. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Judith, for taking the time to attend tonight and your brilliant answers. So thank you very much. It makes things very, very clear. So now we will now turn to agenda item 6, which is on page 37 to 64, which is the Greater Cambridge Local Plan timetable. And I believe that this item will be introduced by the Planning Policy and Strategic Planning Team Leader, Stuart Morris, who is joining us online. And Caroline Hunt, Strategic Planning Manager, is also online. So thank you very much. And Stuart, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. So this is the local plan timetable, previously called the Local Development Scheme, which is a timetable for the production of development plan documents setting out the planning policy framework for Greater Cambridge. So that's a joint timetable. We're required to keep it up to date, and the latest one was agreed by the councils back in 2022. We brought a previous update to you in March, which was approved via an addendum to the approved local development scheme. And at that time, there were a number of key dependencies affecting the production of the Greater Cambridge Local Plan in particular. And those were around water availability, transport strategy, the now previous government's programme for Greater Cambridge, and also that there was to be a new plan making system identified via the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, but with no detailed regulations or guidance. But key to the update in March was that the previous government has set a transitional date for submitting plans under the current system, and that was at the end of June 2025. And so noting all of the uncertainties, but particularly the point that we were required to submit the emerging plan by June 2025 to carry on under the current system, the approved addendum in March set out an indicative revised timetable for preparing the local plan that would have followed the new plan making system and that would have achieved the start of a formal 30-month process by autumn or winter 2025, so next year. So this is the update to that update, which we committed to come back to you with. So this report is a further updated addendum to the local development scheme, and it provides an update on the range of issues that I touched on just now, including the transport strategy, which was referred to in the item earlier. But perhaps key to the proposals in this report are that the new government is proposing to change the previously stated cut-off date for submitting plans, which, as I said, was previously 30th of June 2025, and under the proposals set out in the MPPF consultation over the summer, the date has shifted under those proposals to December 2026. Just as a side note, one of the other, external dependencies for the plan noted in both the March and this update is about East-West Rail. And in the report before you tonight, the report mentions that we will update in the meeting regarding funding to explore the potential development at Camborne related to the East-West Rail station coming. So that's at paragraph 4.2.23. You may have noted that the budget announcement last week committed to deliver East-West Rail, but just to note that we've not yet had confirmation regarding the specific funding for that work. So back to the main story. So the recommendations before you propose a revised draft plan making timetable for the local plan that hits that December 2026 deadline, noting the delay or the pushing back of the introduction of the new plan making system with regulations anticipated around autumn 2025. So as I say, the officer report recommends a draft timetable, noting that that transitional date is yet to be confirmed following the close of consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. And so as such, we're recommending this is a draft timetable. We'll come back to you in March with a confirmed timetable following the government's response to that consultation on the MPPF, but also following the end of the development consent order process for the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant relocation. You might have noted that the decision was due to be made this month. It's now been pushed back until the latest date of 12th of January 2025, with a 6-week judicial review period to follow. That would take you to about March. So by March, we should have those key pieces of information fixed. And as a last note, slightly separate to the revised draft timetable, given the previous delay to the local plan, officers are proposing to amend the plan period to extend the endpoint to reflect national planning policy requirements for a 15-year plan period on adoption of the plan. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Now, any questions? So I have Councillor Bajent. Any other questions? Councillor Porter. No, Councillor Porter, did you put your hand before Councillor Bajent? Okay. And anybody else? No? Okay, so Councillor Bajent.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is, where does the local plan now sit? We're spending lots of money and effort producing a plan that will not now need to be submitted, it appears, until December 26. It's going to take about 2 years to approve that or disapprove it. So we're talking 2028. Meanwhile, the Cambridge Development Group are looking at something that is likely to brush aside our local plan completely. Now, these are two sort of conflicting situations. And this is indeed part of why I wanted to get reports made to this committee by Stephen Kelly and if in turn the leader. We're working on a local plan. A great deal of time and effort is going into that. And yet it's quite clear to anybody with any political insight that the Cambridge Development Group is going to overtake that almost completely. And my question is, what's the common sense here? What is the position? Are these two groups working in silos? Are they working together? Should we be actually still developing a local plan? They're making Cambridge into a special case, the government. Should they be saying to us, you don't need a local plan? I just wondered if the officer is able to answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor Bajent. And I'm going to take the other question as well from Councillor Porter, so they're easier to answer. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I think from our side we're supportive of this, though we do acknowledge the risk, because this is going to be really tight and it's dependent on lots of things we don't control, like the development control order. So I wonder if officers could just let me know and have some reassurance that we are feeding that back routinely to ministers and government and the water scarcity group, because if there are delays that are outside our control, I would hate for us to get to a point where we're just about to submit and then miss the deadline. I mean, I don't see a better option than that, particularly if we don't know what the new local plan's going to involve. So I do support this way forward, but I do absolutely think the risks could be high, because we've already seen a lot of pushback under both governments with the development control order, which is critical, and there are other mechanisms that could worry me. I think the other thing I'd just like to reiterate, and I think it is picked up on page 61, that we have to keep in the stepping for water. So this idea that we're not building out until we have the water available. And I hope officers will be able to reassure me that that will remain the case. And in terms of the Cambridge Development Group, well, Councillor Bajent's mentioned that. Obviously, they need to work together, and I would hope that as it's a Labour government, the ruling group would use their influence to ensure that, because as you know, before we've raised concerns about losing planning control as part of any sort of development corporation, which would be a big worry, although I know Councillor Thornber has reassured us previously that that wouldn't be something you'd be willing to let go. But really, it's just to confirm about the risks and how we're going to make sure government are really aware of that, because we don't want to be reinventing the wheel in 2 years' time. We really need this local plan to come forward as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Stuart, would you like to reply?
Shall I make a start? And I'm sure colleagues can add to that. So I think, there's almost three questions there. So Councillor Bajent, I guess the initial things I'll say, maybe pass over to Caroline, but I guess we've got different messages. So the government ambitions have been said to progress plans as fast as possible is one point, and so we are seeking to do that and to get that certainty by progressing our plan. Engagement with the Cambridge Delivery Group hasn't been in depth to date, but government announced a reset of that relationship in the summer. And I think we can expect, hopefully with the budget announcement last week about confirming its interest in Cambridge, that we would hope there to be further more detailed clarity in the future. I know that we've been influencing and saying the local plan is the first step to any future growth, and I think that's a key message to keep pushing. And the evidence that we've already produced should stand as the basis for any future planning as well, and we keep on being saying to that. I guess an alternative is to wait for a different blueprint to happen to us, and so it seems proactive and positive to keep on working to develop the plan that is based on evidence and based on local engagement to date. But Caroline, I'm sure you can add.
Thank you. We're in a really unusual situation here, aren't we, in Greater Cambridge, with the level of government interest in us, and I think it is only fair to be open and realistic that there are still uncertainties and there are still risks, and I think it's fair to say both councils, through whatever means are available to us, have been at certainly off the level being very clear on trying to understand what is the mood music here. We are still being encouraged to prepare our local plan. We are being encouraged to do that as fast as possible, and that's very much what we are looking to do here. And the timetable is a draft timetable. It may be that by the time we come back in the new year, there may be some more clarity. That would be really helpful to have more clarity from government on precisely what it does intend to do through the Cambridge Delivery Group. But to move forwards, we are continuing to do the work we would need to do to prepare a local plan. And I think the issue around the timetable and this system, new system, it is tight, Councillor Pora. We're very much aware of that, particularly for those latter stages. Draft plan towards the end of next year, if we have clarity around the water, if we have clarity around transport strategy, if we have clarity around the wastewater treatment plant, and the government's planning reforms, whether that date of December 26th is confirmed when the NPPF is published in its final form, and so on, which is why we've brought this to you as a draft timetable. But we wanted to keep the dialogue open with you so you can see where our thinking is going. What we said, even when we did the update in March, that we thought we would need to move to the new plan making system, we were always keen to ensure that the work we had already done would still remain valid. So yes, there are risks. We think it is possible, if everything aligns, to achieve submission by the end of December 26, but we acknowledge in the report that is tight, and I think it's absolutely important that we continue to have discussions with government to make sure that they're aware of our objectives. They continue to help to understand the water supply situation, because we know that's absolutely crucial and fundamental to the plan. Transport strategy also crucial, and if the worst case scenario were to happen and we for some reason didn't make that end of December date, we would want to have been very clear on the way up to that date that we could transition a lot of the work that we had done to the new system if absolutely necessary. But our aim would be to submit by the end of December 26. Tight, but we think is doable. Hopefully that covers the issues that you were raising.
Thank you, Caroline. As well, Heather, you want to add something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add that we are taking all opportunities to highlight to central government the importance of this. So we do have regular meetings with the ministry, and we also, through the combined authority, are highlighting the importance of the matters that have been outlined by Caroline and Stuart in the local plan, in the progression of the local plan, the new emerging local plan. And we also sit on the water scarcity group, so we are feeding into that group as well on a regular basis. And we do have a step trajectory based on water, so that is something that we're making sure, and my colleague John is the expert on water, but we are making sure we do that as well. And wherever possible, we highlight to the Cambridge Delivery Group, or now the Cambridge Growth Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I have Councillor Bick and then Councillor Bajet.
Yeah, I share with everyone the frustrations about the uncertainties in the situation that we're in. And yet I feel that the right thing really is for us to be as proactive as possible in the situation. I mean, in my head, planning for this area is something that we own, and we're looking for help from the government, and just not to do it in the hope that someone else will give it to us seems to me to sort of surrender that local leadership role. I also am concerned at what happens for the duration of the period we don't have a new local plan, that facts on the ground start actually changing what a plan can be when we have one, as in North East Cambridge, which the report refers to, where we already have to change some of the ideas we originally had because of development decisions that have unavoidably been made since. So if anything, my mind turns to why do local plans have to be so monumental? And why actually can't they be more flexible and evolve during their lifetime and consist of more contingencies? I assume that we've explored all of those opportunities, but you know that I think is the way for an area like our own, where there are so many balls in the air and there is so much complexity, to try and plan with confidence, but also with some fluidity about what may happen during the life of any local plan when we get to it.
Thank you, Councillor Bick. Stuart or Caroline or Heather, would you like to make a comment in relation to what Councillor Bick said? Or Caroline?
Well, I would say absolutely. We are very much mindful of, uncertainties in any plan, but particularly in this area. We are aiming to put together a plan that is flexible, that has that element of flexibility built in. Not least because a number of the proposals in the local plan are large strategic sites, and things do change over time. So I hope, Councillor Bick, that we are taking that approach in preparing the plan. I completely agree there needs to be some flexibility as we move forwards. Nonetheless, we do need to have a plan that is evidence-based and will be capable of being found sound at examination. So it's striking the right balance there to have a plan that is capable of moving through to adoption and becoming the development plan for the area, whilst recognising that things do change over time. So hopefully we're hitting that balance, appropriately.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, Heather?
And just to add to that, I think it's important that we note that a lot of the evidence is already in place. All we're doing is updating it for going through this process. It is an emerging local plan that we've been working on for a number of years. So I just wanted to kind of add that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And Councillor Bajet.
Thank you, Chair, and sorry for coming back. Like Councillor Bick and probably every other councillor on the City Council, I am determined that planning permission retained within this council. But from the letter from Matthew Pennicook to Peter Freeman, he emphasises the fact that significant barriers to sustainable growth that are increasing pressures on local residents. He lists things like housing and traffic congestion and the water, of course. And the idea of this group is to circumvent those barriers. And I would argue that we should send a message to say that these people from the Peter Freeman needs to talk to us very quickly to identify in his mind is going to be, because the Deputy Prime Minister is saying in this letter, determined to help overcome these constraints and for central government to work with local partners to support sustainable growth in Cambridge and its environments. Now that haste that this government appears to be putting in place, which is very little different to the previous government, suggests that a plan submitted in 2006 will be brushed to one side because things will be beginning to happen much earlier than that. And this is why I raised this question. So I'm asking that as soon as possible, our planning people meet with Peter Freeman to find out what his intentions are on this matter.
Councillor Sambor.
I'd like to remind Councillor Bajent that our leader, Mike Davey, has met with Peter Freeman, and I think that it might be appropriate if he answers your question rather than the officers in this case.
Agree. Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. Now, if no other points, we'll go to vote, which are the recommendations on page 37 of the agenda pack. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. And does the Executive Councillor agree with the recommendation?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough. Thank you, Stuart and Caroline and Heather. Thank you. Now, it is sort of 7:15. Does anybody need a comfort break or we keep going? No? All right, keep going. Thank you. So before we go to supplementary planning document items, you should have been notified that there have been minor amendments to the recommendations to include consultation with the chair and spokes where necessary. You'll have a printed copy of it. And these will be highlighted at each relevant item. And so you have the hard copy for your information. So now we turn to agenda item 7, which is on page 65 to 278, which is the draft Greater Cambridge Planning Obligations Supplementary Planning Document. So, mouthful for that one. So I believe that this item will be introduced by the delivery manager, Toby Williams. The planning policy manager, Jonathan Dixon, is also here to support this item. So welcome both. So Toby, please start. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. So the Planning Obligations SPD establishes a more standardised approach to the policies and procedures that apply to the use of Section 106 agreements for new development across Greater Cambridge. For the City Council, this means the current Planning Obligations SPD 2010 would be revoked if the new Section 106 SPD were to be adopted. On approval, the new SPD would be a material consideration in the determination of planning applications. The overall objectives of the SPD are to be clear regarding expectations for planning obligations, to ensure obligations are maximised based on current policies and practices, and to minimise the cost and time the councils incur in negotiating and agreeing Section 106 agreements. In terms of input, the draft SPD, this has been sought from officers across both councils. External partners have also contributed, such as the County Council and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Integrated Care System. The content of the SPD, well, the draft SPD is split into chapters. There's an introductory chapter setting out the purpose of the SPD, its status and legislative context. Then Chapter 2 sets out the expectations for how planning obligations will be considered and agreed and promotes early engagement. Chapter 3 sets out how developers and stakeholders are to use the document. The remaining chapters then deal with the specific types of infrastructure or obligations that may need to be secured by applying policies in the adopted local plans and each chapter follows a similar format in terms of setting out the need, justification for the infrastructure and the relevant local plan policies. The last chapter lists some other potential development-specific obligations such as heritage impacts, air quality and sustainable drainage, providing references where necessary. So in summary, the SPD will support the councils in securing infrastructure necessary to provide the needs generated by new developments. And the report recommends, firstly, that the draft SPD and accompanying EQIA are agreed to be publicly consulted upon. And secondly, that agreement that the preparation of consultation materials, including minor amendments to the SPD prior to publication and the running of the consultation, be delegated to the Joint Director of Planning, noting that the consultation is expected to take place between November of this year to mid-January 2025. And if material amendments are required to the SPD ahead of publication, these will be agreed by the Executive Councillor for Planning, Building Control and Infrastructure, subject to the revision, Chair, that you called out on the amendment sheet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toby. Now, are there any questions? I have Councillor Porter and Councillor Griffin. So, Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome this. Seems a positive move. Had a few queries. Page 38, or page 109 on our numbering, talks about 25% shared ownership. I thought the recent housing policy had moved away from that. So I just wondered if officers could check that, because I think shared ownership has not been a particularly successful model. And I have a feeling I'm pretty certain in the housing papers that came to Housing Committee, not ours, that had been changed. So I'd just be grateful if you could check that before it goes live. On page 41, which I think is 111 of the papers here, I'm not particularly comfortable with the phrasing of paragraph 4.45 on viability. Because it basically says, if it's not viable, we'll negotiate down. Whereas my understanding was our local plan is predicated on those sites being viable with that 40% affordable. And I suppose if I were reading that as a developer, I'd be like, oh, brilliant, I can just tweak it. Whereas I certainly think Planning Committee has been fairly robust on wanting that, as has officers. So again, I'd just ask officers if you might be able to look at that and just reiterate that this is not an assumption that you can do that. There would have to be a really exceptional case made. And in particular with the new Labour government's view on affordable housing. I mean, you know, it's certainly going up, not coming down. So I would ask the Exec Councillor to consider whether that could be at least reconsidered, to phrase it in a slightly different way. And I think the review of costs for viability, that is covered in 2.55, so that's great. It's picked up in 4.46 as well. One thing I know that comes up a lot at planning committees are the idea of adopted roads and fair management fees. I think it is referenced in here that roads will be built to adoptable standards, but I suppose my personal view is it would be better if it was clear that the local authority, you know, we expect roads to be of adoptable standard, and that where management charges are imposed by private companies, we would expect those to be fair and reasonable without these kind of situations we found on some of the newer estates where you get sort of a dead tree and the residents are paying a considerable sum of money for something that really isn't paying back. And finally, we talk about biodiversity net gain, and we actually reference a 20% aspiration, but on the next page, and I think on page 49, we actually talk about only 10%. So I just wonder if those two bits could be tied up. So it's clear that whilst there is a minimum 10%, our aspiration is 20. Because obviously I'm just mindful, when you flick through it, that's the one that jumps out. So they're all fairly minor points, but I would just be grateful if those could be considered. Because I think certainly the 40% viability thing is something we've taken very seriously cross-party as a city over the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Toby, would you like to reply?
Sure thing. So on the point of shared ownership, my understanding is the document was prepared in accordance with the latest housing strategy and reflects Appendix 2 as set out within that. But we will absolutely double check that it's consistent with the emerging guidance in that strategy. On viability, absolutely take your point, Councillor. There is another section within the introductory parts of the 106 that deal with viability more robustly. I think my view would be that there is a need for perhaps some cross-referencing within the document to ensure that there's not an automatic assumption, and when you read those introductory sections, it's clear that there's not an automatic assumption that affordable housing will go down as a percentage. Note your comments regarding costs for viability. Regarding kind of adopted roads, that is an issue that is at the forefront of officers' minds. We have had a site recently where that issue has come to the fore. I don't think it is for the planning obligations SPD to directly tackle this issue, but it is something certainly that planning conditions can tackle directly, and there is a standard condition that officers have that could perhaps be more widely implemented where private roads are proposed. Regarding B&G, take your point, officers can look to see whether that section of the SPD could be strengthened to make it clear what is the requirement and what is the aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. I have Councillor Griffin and then Councillor Clough. So, Councillor Griffin.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So my question is a very general one, and I guess it's for my own enlightenment, but perhaps for any residents who might share some of these concerns and they might be watching now. I'm thinking, like, this is a very technical document, right? It's a very lengthy and technical document. So what part of our community participates in public consultations on a document like this? And how transparent is that to residents at large? You know, obviously there can be groups that have financial interests in this document. And are those explicitly declared in our public consultations? And how are those all taken into account? And are the consultations, are the result of the consultations made public, for example? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Griffin. Toby? Oh, John will answer. Okay.
It's a fair question. You might recall to this committee a year, 18 months ago, we brought our statement of community involvement, which set out what we would do to consult generally, but also what we do about our supplementary planning documents and so on. I have to agree with you, this is one of our more technical SPDs. And that's deliberate because it's trying to speed up and clarify the process we use for planning obligations, because it is a highly technical process. And one of our aspirations for doing this document was to set out upfront and in detail how we operate that process. So to an extent, that's unavoidable. What we will try and do, though, I'm working with the wider team to look at how we consult on all three of these supplementary documents. And we'll be looking at how we use the website, how we provide non-technical summaries. They're looking at doing an online event where they can explain, hopefully, the purpose behind it and some of the information behind it. And I think we are looking at doing a live event, although, to be honest, that's mainly focused on the CBC one because we feel that's the one people can most engage with on an on-the-ground basis. So I think we will do our best on this one to make sure people can engage, and there's certainly issues within it, we hope people will. But I think it isn't the easiest one to do that of all the things we do, so there'll be some, you have to bear with us a bit on this one, but as part of the wider local plan, certainly public engagement is a huge issue we want to keep building on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Stanborough.
I wonder if, Jonathan, you could explain how, after the consultation, when we get, how we respond directly to each.
Sorry, I missed that bit. So we will provide You can make comments online, and we provide email address and so on. So we hope to provide people with as easy method as possible to make their comments available. When we receive those, we will summarise them and look into all the issues raised. But part of the process of doing an SPD requires us to show how we've considered the results by documenting that in a statement of consultation. So we will bring that back to this committee. I think we're aiming for March. So you have access to that information, but also we will then confirm to those that took part the opportunity to look at how we have responded. So we hope that process will give people the chance to see not only have we received the comments, but we've also looked into them and responded to them.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Clough, you had a question.
Yes, it's just a question for clarification, and it's on 4.23 at the top of the page 38, which is on page 108. The first bullet point talks about 75% of the affordable housing to be affordable social rent on 106 sites above 15 homes, at least 10% of the 75% to be allocated for social rent. So what I'm trying to understand is it 40% times 75% times 10%, i.e., is it only 3% of those housing units that would be required to be at social rent? So that's the first part of the question. And, or maybe I've got the maths wrong, and I'm very happy to be corrected, obviously. And then the next question is, in terms of how you calculate the, whether it's by the doors or by the bedrooms or whatever, is it that 4.2 links into that, so that you're looking at the total internal space of the, does that 4.2 drive into the calculation above? I hope that's clear.
Thank you. Now with Toby.
Excuse me, Chair, I just need to navigate my way to the part of the report that Councillor Clough is recommending.
So it's on page 108 of the main document and page 38 of the individual document. So it's 4.23 on, and then the actual bullet point is at the top of the following page in the hard copy.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Clough. So, trying to understand how you got to that 3%. It's seven. The overall kind of requirement is for 40% affordable housing, of which 75% would be expected to be affordable / social rent, with the remainder effectively going towards shared ownership.
So it's 30%, not 3%. So we're not applying a 10%.
Are you interested in sorry, are you interested in the where it says on section 106 sites above 15 homes, at least 10% of the 75 to be allocated for social rent? Is that the bit that's troubling you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, I don't know if I can do the maths, but I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah, no, it's working. So if I could just add, I think, so what you're saying is it's 75% of the 40%, and it's at least 10% of the 75% of the 40%, which is very, yeah, but that is right. And then it's, so I think you were talking about sites of 15 homes or above, is that right? So if you were to take that, what is 75% of the, 10% of the 75% of the 40%, essentially.
Yeah, I think if there is any cause for confusion, maybe we will consider some form of kind of clarification to that part of 4.23, so there's no confusion in the reader when they're looking at it.
Because obviously, if it's only 3%, you know, if your land's going and you only get 3% social housing, that's pretty low. So then my next question, following on.
Sorry, just to add to that through you, Chair, we will discuss that with our housing colleagues, because obviously that's where we're taking this from. So we will get that clarified, particularly taking on board the earlier point about making sure everyone understands what we're aiming here. So
Appreciate that. I'm just trying to understand the facts. So my second part of my question was, how are you calculating the quantities in it? So are you calculating it on the basis of doors or bedrooms or internal area? Because obviously you've got a development where you have got a couple of single-person flats, and and the doors are counted. That's very different from including something which relates to, say, the actual capacity of the houses, which might be, a larger house might have 3 or 4 bedrooms. So it's the basis of calculation. So I've read the 4.2 to be, it's the internal house and the internal area of, so if a developer wants to put 2 or 3 executive homes with large internal areas, they're going to be using that internal forage, whereas, it's perfectly reasonable in terms of the quantity of social rent to have it at, to have plenty of small flats, because that might be what's needed at a particular time. But again, that basic parameter will be good to know that, have that clarified as well. So I'd like to thank you for all the work you've done in preparing this. Thank you.
Heather would like to answer. Yeah.
I think I can helpfully kind of give you some reassurance in how that would be approached, because this document, as you said earlier, ties in very closely to the housing strategy that was approved earlier in summer, and that does require a kind of mirroring of the market provision with the affordable provisions, so that you would avoid precisely the scenario that you've just set out, where you might have a developer that seeks to develop at a very low density executive houses and only carves out a smaller proportion for the site for higher density affordable housing. That is actually, in terms of the council's approach, the council would be legitimately able to say to a developer in that circumstance that if that is their approach, then we would seek for 40% of the site area to be given over for affordable housing. So there are safeguards within both this document, but more importantly within the housing strategy, that seek to avoid that circumstance, Councillor.
Yes, and I'd like to apologise about bringing such a late curveball question on there. I mean, we had a very excellent briefing, and I only just today noticed this point, which I didn't understand. So I apologise for taking the committee's time on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Toby. Now, if there are no further questions, we will now move to the vote. And the recommendation is on page 65 of the agenda pack. And the recommendation C has been amended to include in consultation with the chair and spokespersons. So remember that. So all those in favour?
That's unanimous again, Chair.
Thank you very much. And does the Executive Council agree with the recommendation?
I do, and thank you for the officers for preparing all this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Toby and Jonathan. So now we will move to agenda item 8, which is on page 279 and up to 440, which is the draft Greater Cambridge Health Impact Assessment Supplementary Planning Document. And this item will be introduced by the Principal Policy Manager, Nancy Kimberley. She is online and is joined by the Environmental Health Manager, Yvonne O'Donnell, and the Health Prevention Programme Officer, Susan Goff. Nancy, if you would like to begin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this item is about the Draft Health Impact Assessment Supplementary Planning Document, or HIA-SPD, and it applies to the whole of Greater Cambridge and provides further guidance on the implementation of policies in the Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire local plans, which aim to deliver healthy places. An HIA is a method of assessing the potential health impacts of a development on different population groups, particularly looking at protected groups. They identify how negative impacts can be avoided or mitigated and how positive impacts can be maximised. The SPD sets out the types of the development that will require an HIA and how to carry them out, and developers are encouraged to contact the local planning authority at an early stage to discuss and agree the scope of work required. The SPD sets out how to assess potential impacts on both physical and mental health, how to make recommendations, and how to present the results in a report which would be submitted alongside the planning application. And if the draft SPD is approved, it will go out to public consultation for 8 weeks from late November. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Are there any questions in relation to this? Yes, Councillor Porter.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this seems, again, a very welcome addition. Seems very sensible. I just had a few minor questions. I noticed on page 303, we talk about healthy homes having semi-private external spaces. I think our local plan is pretty clear they have to be private external spaces, so I just wanted to note that. Secondly, looking at the health impacts of buildings and sustainability, in the questionnaire which is on page 331 of our papers, could we add something about single aspect homes? Because in terms of climate resilience and difficulties for those on low incomes, if you've got a single aspect home, you're going to have to pay to cool it. I just would welcome that being on the checklist as a kind of flag that I know they're not excluded by our local plan yet, but again, it's just putting that little marker down to sort of say, if you've got single aspect homes, you need to think about mitigation and the impacts on equalities for that. And I'd say the same probably on page 335 about retrofitting. So, we've had some examples recently. We can't stop gas in our current local plan, but we've had some developers who've in effect installed gas but have retrofitted the house in advance. So there's space for an air source heat pump, so the piping is in. So again, we can't insist on this, but I think as a health thing, I can see Councillor Thornborough nodding. We normally raise this at committee a lot. It would just be useful to have that in there, just to kind of put that marker down and say, when you're thinking about these health impacts, show us that you're in effect retrofitting in advance. And I think the only other question, which I'd just like some reassurance, so page 307 is kind of the flow chart as to how it gets to meet the minimum floor space to be assessed. Obviously, we will have huge sites that will come through in parcels. That might be an outline with reserve matters, or we might just have 4 or 5 parts of the site coming forward separately. Could officers just reassure me that obviously that will be picked up, so we wouldn't have a kind of issue where everything comes through slightly under the need for an HIA? I think that is covered in some of our other documents, but it would be just be useful to make that clear. So obviously if a big site comes forward in parcels, we're making sure that we're assessing the whole site if it qualifies for the HIA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Nancy, would you like to comment and answer?
Okay, thank you. In terms of the parcels, obviously the SB does set out the requirement for a full HIA at 100 plus dwellings, which would, within our larger sort of urban extensions, that would be covered. And it's good to look at the site as a whole. So at a reserved so at the outline application stage, it should cover that. But obviously if developers did try and come in slightly under there is a catch-all threshold as well, which any developments that could have a significant impact on health can be sort of covered if they're below the threshold. In terms of the other aspects, they're quite specific points. So I'll probably look to John to see if he thinks we can include them within the, because they're not actually covered within policy in the local plan at the moment. So I don't know if you can help on that one, John.
I think Councillor Poor has clearly done the research and got very specific points, so I will have to go away and look at how they relate to the adopted plan. Clearly that point on external space, clearly our aim is to be consistent with adopted plans. So I'm happy to, we'll take that one away. Single aspect, I know that's a point we raised in our comment to the recent NPPF consultation as well. I think the thing to do is to take those 3 points away if it's in agreement with the lead member. But obviously we have to be conscious that the whole thing about expertise, we can't make a policy, we'd have to be consistent with the local plan, but happy to take that one up with you, Councillor Thornborough, and see if there's anything we think needs to be amended.
I think they're good suggestions, but I think this has to align with the 2018. So, but I think the points you've raised are our concerns as we keep raising them in planning committee. So I think if we can ask the officer to consider if there is any chance.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate they're not in the local plan. I think it's just having them on the checklist, not saying we're going to stop you building, but just having that, if you've got single aspects, how are you going to deal with the health impacts? It's not asking them to do anything different from what we already would, really, because they've actually got to comply with Part O and all those things anyway. But I think, as Councillor Thornborough said, it's just having those little reminders means that if I were a developer, particularly some of the smaller developers who perhaps don't have the huge experience of some of our bigger developers, just to go and think, oh yeah, that's a good point. Because, you know, we have seen single aspect come forward where you can add in a little bit extra on the corners, or you can have mitigation from reversible air source heat pumps. So I think anything that could be done to at least flag that, whilst accepting completely that we're not going to force through something with that, would just help, because it, you know, certainly on the larger developments, something that gets raised a lot and can be mitigated if people know about it in advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And then Councillor Clough.
Oh, thank you. Again, it's just a point of clarification. On the flowchart, again on page 307, it looks as if the trigger for doing the desktop or rapid HIA assessment only applies to South Cambs. Is that for a particular reason? Because it would seem that there's just as many risks in terms of dense site developments in Cambridge, where perhaps between 20 and 100 houses were being developed, where perhaps the advantage of an HIA would be worthwhile having. So why do not sites in the city not have that benefit? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that point? John, okay.
We've sought, again, this comes down to adopted plans, and we've sought to balance the requirements of the adopted plans, and the South Cambs plan is very specific about its thresholds and requirements, but we still think there is value looking at the requirements of the adopted plan in bringing in the health impact assessment method to show how it implements the adopted policies of the plan. So it's trying to reflect the adopted plans. Clearly in the new local plan, we look again at those approaches, thresholds, and maybe this will be a good trial to see what works best, but we think we're trying to reflect the requirements of the plan carefully and make sure we're not overstepping them.
So what you're saying is that in the Cambridge local plan, 100 is the trigger and not 20?
Yeah, we've set a slightly higher threshold because we think the South Cambs one sets a lower threshold, but we think this is an appropriate level to be setting it in.
Sorry, do you mean, I mean, I understand you can't bring in SPD to change policy, but is the policy says that the threshold is there a particular reason for is the threshold set in the local plan? So would it be appropriate for us to have that?
So that we're recommending you set a slightly higher threshold in Cambridge because we can't change the South Cambs local plan. That's fixed, that was fixed. The policy was written around 10 years ago. This is the threshold we recommend is used in Cambridge, where there isn't a threshold specifically set in the local plan. We think that's an appropriate threshold to apply to Cambridge.
Oh, right, okay, so it would be possible to do it if that was, if the process, you know, if we were minded to do that. So there's no technical reason for not having it at 20.
The officers are recommending, based on their experience using the process, that's a threshold where you would get the most benefit versus the work of doing. And we think that's the appropriate threshold to apply in Cambridge to get the best out of the process.
Stand, thank you.
Can I just add to that? I think as we've also highlighted, we do have the opportunity to look at that differently with development with potentially significant health impacts. So we still have the opportunity to look. So that allows us to lower that threshold if we felt that it was appropriate. And I think, as John has outlined, you know, experience now will allow us to take the best process forward in the emerging joint local plan. So we're trying to get that balance.
Thank you, Heather. Now, if no further questions, we will move to the vote, and the recommendation is on pages 279 and 280 of the agenda pack, and recommendation C has been amended to include in consultation with the chair and spokespersons. So all those in favour, please raise your hand.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. And does the Executive Councillor agree the recommendation?
I do, thank you very much, and thanks to the officers.
All right, we'll have a 5-minute comfort break before moving to the next one. So come back. So we now turn to agenda item number 9, which are in pages 441 to 574 of the draft. So this is the draft Greater Cambridge Biomedical Campus Supplementary Planning Documents. And this item will be introduced by the Principal Planning Policy Officer, Lizzie Wood, the Planning Policy and Strategic Planning Team Leader, Terry De Souza, also is joining us. So Lizzie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this draft Greater Cambridge Biomedical Campus Supplementary Planning document is to provide planning guidance for informed development at the existing Cambridge Biomedical Campus. For this item, I'll refer to the document as the CBC SPD, as it's a very long title otherwise. The SPD provides supplementary guidance on the implementation of policies already set out in the adopted local plans and provides a framework for developers and infrastructure providers to consider when preparing schemes on the campus. The guidance will also form an integral part of the development management process, setting out material considerations for determining planning applications on the campus. The SPD does not create policy, but instead sets out the principles that should be considered in early stages of the planning process in order to deliver high quality development across the campus. In the preparation of the SPD so far, we've carried out some early engagement with local residents associations, parish councils and statutory bodies through an invitation to share thoughts of what to include in the SPD. We've had feedback from local representatives of the community, such as the Ward of Queen Edith's, Trumpington Residents Association, Shelford Parish Council and other groups, and we've factored these into the principles that we've set out in the SPD. For example, the inclusion of high quality green open spaces and applying a holistic approach to the development coming forward on the campus. We've also held a number of briefings with both lead members and a webinar for all members, parish councils, residents associations that we've had good feedback from so far. So as a result, we've drafted the SPD and split it into chapters that set out the purpose of why we're putting the SPD forward, the overarching ambitions for the campus and details of the local context and current provision on the campus. Chapter 4 is the main section of the document that identifies a number of high-level principles that will inform development coming forward on the campus, supporting the delivery of the vision overall in the longer term for the campus. So the overarching themes cover open spaces and landscape, public realm and well-being, the built form, connectivity and movement, sustainability and phasing and delivery. The last chapter is chapter 5, which sets out the obligations and mitigation of potential impacts from new development, with questions that developers can consider in the preparation of planning applications to ensure that proposals individually and cumulatively make a positive contribution towards the longer-term vision of the campus. So we're proposing that we'll go out to public consultation on the draft SPD and supporting documents from the end of November of this year to mid-January 2025. We've allowed 8 weeks for the consultation period to maximise participation and reflect our recently adopted statement of community involvement, as John mentioned earlier, and also to consider the Christmas period so that we can make sure everyone can be involved. Once the public engagement has been carried out, we'll consider the representations, make our final amendments to the SPD, and bring the final version to members, recommending it for adoption next year. So the recommendations for this item are set out on page 441, and those are to agree the draft SPD and accompanying equalities impact assessment to go out to public consultation, agree the preparation of materials and the running of consultation to be delegated to the Joint Director of Planning, and includes the amendments to Part C as highlighted by Chair, to agree that any subsequent material amendments prior to consultation be made by the Executive Council for Planning, Building Control and Infrastructure in consultation with the Executive Council for Planning, Policy and Transport and the Chair and Spokesperson for Planning Policy and Transport Scrutiny Committee, and that any subsequent minor amendments, editing changes that do not materially affect the content prior to consultation be delegated to Joint Director of Planning in consultation with lead member for planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Now, are there any questions? So I have Councillor Bajan, Councillor Porritt and Councillor Bajan. Oh. Sure. Okay.
I don't mind deferring to you if you want to go first. Okay. I've got a couple of, one question, or one suggestion and one question. The car parking on the bio campus. The bio campus is expanding, and from the meeting that I attended a couple of weeks ago about the expansion of the bio campus, they're going to be taking more greenbelt, which everybody probably accepts is necessary. But at the same time, on this campus, they continue to develop car parking spaces. We agreed at the last planning committee, I think it was the last planning committee, a car park for 500 car parking spaces. Now, the bio campus is jammed with traffic. The going home time, it can take 3/4 of an hour to get a car out of the campus, I'm told. I've seen it as I cycle past it on my bike, but that makes no sense for us to continue to allow piecemeal car parking, which under the current situation we're required to allow because it's not a requirement. We can't use car parking as something that we stop a planning application for. So I'm asking that we consider very seriously reducing to car parking on the bio campus and any future planning applications to be reduced to that which is absolutely essential for people who are disabled. So that's my first point. My second point is a question. The new Cambridge South station, has that been developed on the basis of the current workforce, which is around, I understand, 20,000, or on the proposed workforce, which is potentially up to 60 to 100,000 people?
Thank you, Councillor Bajan. And I'll take Councillor Porritt question as well now. Yeah.
I would definitely like to thank officers for this because we haven't had a master plan and this is the next best thing. And we really need this because we've had so many applications coming to the Joint Development Committee, which are just piecemeal. And it was really refreshing to see the last JDCC where we did have one that did link into a cycle route and sort of take into account some of these principles. And I know it's been a big job for officers, so I do appreciate that. I agree with Councillor Bajan that transport is critical. You know, Cambridge South is going to have 1,000 cycle spaces, plus those around the Biomed campus. And, you know, I've been a regular visitor to Adam Brooks for the last few days, and there's no segregated walkways. You've got cycles going on the same place as really slow-moving people coming out of hospital. It's, you know, it really does need sorting out. Things like the segregated paths, you know, will be really important. I do welcome, it does have in this SPD an aspiration to reduce car parking, and I think that's good. And I think, you know, things like looking at reuse of multi-storey car parks to make them into kind of different kind of travel hubs over time is brilliant. And the public realm, again, you know, hospital is not a happy place to be for most people, so having good public realm where people can have a bit of green time is important. I think on page 482 we talk about water, and I do think it is really, really critical that officers, and I think councillors as well, put considerable weight on reducing water use for the non-clinical usages. Because, you know, we know lab use has high water use. We know that there are just some businesses on that site that aren't part of the hospital. And we know that for clinical use, there will be a slightly higher water usage because they can't necessarily use grey water or rainwater. But I think I would just really stress that water is important, and any developers coming forward, I think really do need to pay attention to page 482, where we talk about the need to be exemplar in that with rainwater and grey water, because, you know, this is going to be a growing site and our water supply is not growing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porritt. Lizzie, would you like to reply? And Terry, if you want to add on afterwards. So, Lizzie?
Thank you. I'll take the first point around accessibility and, you know, really pushing forward for active travel on the site. So obviously the SPD is supplementing our existing adopted local plan. So going forward with our work on the emerging local plan, we'll be looking at, you know, maximising delivery of accessibility through that work we're doing, but also the SPD does set out in principle 4D.3 the promotion of those active travel measures, trying to promote cycle and other wheeled vehicle parking that's not just for cars, and asking developers to look at those strategies to prioritise cycling and walking infrastructure, and trying to demonstrate that in the proposals going forward that they've considered alternative car parking strategies on the campus. Terry, did you want to touch on the point about the station?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think just quickly, just to finish off Lizzie's response on the car parking provision, we do appreciate that it's a significant issue at the campus at the moment. So whilst relatively speaking, the modal share, so the number of people kind of coming into the campus by private vehicle, is comparatively low compared to some of the employment sites we have in Greater Cambridge. It's a real significant issue within the local area, and that was really clear to us when we've had early engagement with local groups, resident associations, parish councils, etc. Now, in addition to what Lizzie's been talking about, we are engaging with the biomedical campus, including the landowners group, on what does it mean for the future for the campus moving forward in terms of the local plan, and we are trying to work with them to understand what sort of strategy needs to be in place as an overarching piece, as well as more detailed work on transport modelling. And we'll be working closely with the county in terms of their highways function, as well as other partners like the Combined Authority and the GCP as we develop that work on the local plan. So whilst the SPD, I think, sets some good principles moving, in the kind of short term, and I think page 488 also refers to connectivity and movement and looking beyond the red line boundary of sites and seeing that bigger picture. I suppose just trying to reassure members that we are also looking at that longer term piece as well as part of the work we're doing on the local plan. In reference to Cambridge South Station and the question for Councillor Pageant, I've got to confess I don't know the exact answer to that one. What I do know is that the station has been planned in terms of a four platform station, but nevertheless, again, early engagement with local community groups have identified that there are constraints, there are pinch points that have been highlighted, whether it's kind of around the people and sort of movement network or the provision bus stopping spaces. There are definitely pinch points there, and I guess that's part of the issue of when you're trying to almost retrofit a new train station into an existing space. There will always be kind of compromises there. Nevertheless, again, I think there's a couple of things we can do. We're going to be looking at that as part of the emerging local plan and thinking about that overall movement strategy, how people get in and out of the campus. But also, I suppose, as highlighted from one of the first agenda items in the local plan timetable, the station will be open and operational within the next sort of 6 to 12 months. And so I think we can also evaluate what happens when the station opens to see how things are evolving from day one. And I think that we will be working closely with Network Rail and the Combined Authority and others to see what happens there, to see if there's any kind of lessons learned that we can kind of build into the local plan policy as we develop the plan through the plan making process. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think Councillor Pora was more of a comment than a question, but just to say that yes, officers do know that water is a considerable issue in the area that's been kind of well referenced in multiple committees and discussions. So yes, we agree with her, and hopefully the wording in the SPD is she's supportive of that generally. Thank you.
Thank you, through Chair, and just to add as well, in respect of your point, Councillor Pora, we do look to conditions to help to support with that as well. So where there is a non-clinical use, we would put expectations through the planning committee process. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Pageant.
Chair, I'm pleased to have raised the point about Cambridge South, and I hear the officer's response and anticipate that he's anticipating it in a very similar form to me. The answer to the first question, really, my point is that in this SPD, can we not put it, or can we put in some emphasis on reducing car parking? Can we not make some rules within the SPD that can become material considerations when these things come to planning committee? Because at this present moment, we're forced to accept car parks because they're allowed to build them. If the SPD was to say no more car parks except for disabled people, then we'd be in a far stronger position at planning committee and the use of the land would be much better.
Thank you, Councillor Bate. Terry, would you like to reply?
I suppose the one thing that I would refer back to is with all supplementary planning documents, they can't introduce new policy. So we do have adopted car parking standards for the city and for South Cams through the adopted local plans, but the SPD can't introduce new policy. So it can guide, it can encourage, it can outline principles like this document does, but it can't necessarily introduce new requirements for development moving forward. Now, I do appreciate the fact that the hospital is an interesting case actually, because I agree with Councillor Bagent in the fact that it's very difficult to it puts members sometimes in a difficult position because clearly there are members of society that require car parking access to the hospitals in particular because of limited mobility issues, and the fact that it has not only a local but a regional catchment. And so therefore there is that obviously there's that tension, I suppose, there. But I think from my understanding and some of the applications that have recently come to JDCC is that some of these are for temporary car parking provision. That's my understanding anyway. And so therefore, I suppose it's making sure that, if things are decided now, that if they're temporary in nature, then, it's about thinking about what was the longer term use of that land. And that's where the local plan kicks in. And then also it's thinking about what's the longer term strategy to reducing the reliance on people using the car. Now, things like the station, potentially the CSET scheme, the Salisbury Greenway, there's a number of things coming online shortly that could fundamentally change the way people get in and out of the campus. Obviously, what that actually means in practice and what is that shift, how many people are going to get on the train, how many people are going to use the Salisbury Greenway, all of those things are still being worked through and they are being led by other organisations, not the planning authority. But clearly they will be game changers in their own right. So, in some ways, hopefully temporary car parks with a shelf life and end date alongside these new things coming on board will hopefully make a significant difference to how people get in and around the campus moving forward.
Thank you very much, Terry. And sorry, Councillor Bagent, is it in relation to the same point or is that a point of clarification?
I think this is important, Chair. Everybody accepts that if you're disabled, you may need to drive to the campus. Everybody accepts probably that most people that are not very well need to be able to drive to the campus. What I'm talking about is the wider campus, not the Adam Brooks bit, but the life sciences bit. And surely we can toughen up the SPD on those particular areas. Because right at this moment, it might be a temporary car park, but it's a multi-storey temporary car park. It's not just a piece of land that's been put aside. It's actually being built. So it's not very temporary. It's been built on the basis that it could be used perhaps for something else or taken to pieces. But it's not really temporary. And I think we shouldn't, because of the jams there, we shouldn't be allowing willy-nilly car parking in the new sites. And I'm sure that we could toughen the SPD up. Thank you. I won't say any more, but I think it's really important.
I'd just like to say, Councillor Bagent, that it is important, but the officer has explained that we can't change current policy and that we're going to be looking at these issues in the emerging local plan, and that the best way forward is to be talking to the applicants about the issues you've raised. But we can't change the SPD because we can't bring in new policy. But we all agree that it's an important point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Steinbauer. Yeah, that would require all the type of changes that is basically required sort of in the law itself. So we won't go to that point. Sorry, Councillor Clark. Yeah.
I'd like to thank Councillor Bagent for his last clarification of his concern. And I understand the difference between people who are travelling to Adam Brooks, who generally, if you're travelling you may often want to go with or be taken by a family member in a car. So it might be, I understand what we're saying about we can't do anything about the SPT to override policy, but maybe an understanding of the difference between the number of people who are going along to attend clinics and wards or to visit ill relatives. Maybe it would help our understanding of how we go forward, and perhaps something could be added in terms of the very excellent narrative descriptions in the SPD. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, would you like to comment or just a point, to note?
I think it might be a point to note at that point, if that's okay. And then if we need to reflect any of the wording in the narrative, as Councillor Clough has mentioned, then we can do that.
Thank you very much, Terry. So now we'll move then to the vote, and the recommendation is on page 441 of the agenda pack. So recommendation C has been amended to include in consultation with the chair and spokespersons. So all those in favour, please raise your hand.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. And does the Executive Council agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do, and thanks to the officers who brought this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Lizzie and Terry. And I believe the next item is also yours, which is item 10. That's the update to neighbourhood planning toolkit from page 575 to 657. So, Lizzie, I believe you'll be introducing this item.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So an initial neighbourhood planning toolkit was adopted by South Cambridgeshire District Council
Lizzie,
in
just
2018.
Lizzie, just give me 1 second. Hold on. Councillor, what is it?
Sorry, I've just realised that I may need to, I don't know whether it's a conflict of interest or he's still a member of the South Newnham Neighbourhood Forum. I'm not on the committee well, that's the body preparing the South Newnham Neighbourhood Plan. So I'm not, and is in receipt of some of the excellent work which Lizzie's been conducting. So I would like to comment, but I just thought I should declare that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Klopp. And then, Lizzie, please continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So the initial neighbourhood planning toolkit was adopted by South Cambridgeshire District Council in 2018, and we've been using it to support parish councils and also informally to support and guide our neighbourhood forums. So we currently have one neighbourhood forum in the city, which is South Newnham Neighbourhood Forum. And so from the work that we've been doing, we thought that we would amend and update the neighbourhood planning toolkit to be relevant for the whole of Greater Cambridge. So the updated neighbourhood planning toolkit has been amended to provide guidance across both the city and South Cambs, particularly addressing how we can support forums, as well as providing up-to-date guidance that we found effective over the last 5 years since we adopted that toolkit. The toolkit has been amended to be more user-friendly, with the document being structured with clear sections and headings for each stage of the plan-making process, so that it's accessible for all of our users. The toolkit sets out top tips throughout the document to support the smooth running and preparation of a neighbourhood plan, and we provided checklists for groups to check in with and get in touch with us at the right stages of the plan making process, and they're in the appendices of the neighbourhood plan toolkit. So essentially this report seeks to approve the neighbourhood plan toolkit to be used within the city and update our Greater Cambridgeshire Planning website with this relevant link. And the recommendation on page 575 of the report pack sets out that we agree the updated version of the toolkit, update our website and publish it, and agree that any future minor amendments, such as keeping up-to-date links and legislation and guidance, be delegated to Joint Director of Planning, and agrees that any material amendments be delegated to in consultation with the Executive Council for Planning, Building Control and Infrastructure, and adds the amendment, as Chair said earlier on, in consultation with the Executive Council for Planning Policy and Transport, and the Chair and spokesperson for the Planning Policy and Transport Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Are there any questions at all on this item? Yes, Councillor Purr.
Just be very brief to say this sounds like a very good idea. Yeah, and it's been working successfully in South Cambs, I understand, so it seems sensible to learn from their good practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay. So we'll then move on. Kennedy, you want to do anything else in relation to this? No?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we're really pleased to bring this forward here as well. So thank you, through you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. So now we'll go to vote, and the recommendation is on page 575 of the agenda pack. Now, recommendation B has been amended to include in consultation with the chair and spokespersons. So all those in favour, please raise your hands.
Not voting in case there is a conflict, thank you. But I support all the work they've done, thank you.
That's 6 in favour, Chair.
Thank you. And does the Executive Councillor agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do, and thanks the officer for all their work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie, and Terry, thank you very much. So we now turn to the record of decisions taken since the last meeting. Now, these are just to note, so I propose we take them all together. There are 9 in total, from pages 659 to page 702, items 11A to 11I. So before I ask the members to note the decisions, are there any comments? And please keep them concise, as the decisions have already been made. No. Okay, so does the committee note these items?
Noted, Chair.
Thank you very much. So this concludes the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee. The date of the next scheduled meeting is the 14th of January, 2025. So thank you to everyone who took part, and thank you to the people online. And can we please now end the live stream?